thank you so much for being here today. This is a fantastic showing. Most seats are filled. Sometimes I can't tell because there's black and there's white seats, and so it all blends in. It looks fuller than it is. My name is Christopher Sebastian. I'm the Director of Advancement for Mother Divine Grace School, and I'll be your MC here tonight. First of all, we want to express our deep gratitude to the Thrashers for welcoming us here today. I know many of you know them. They are so committed to the community. It is truly inspiring to see how fully they embrace their vocation as parents and homeschooling parents. They were enrolled with Mother Divine Grace School for 27 years. All 9 of their children graduated with us. The last Mary is, somewhere else. Mary's somewhere out there. Class of 2023. And truly, their commitment to family life is inspiring. We are so grateful for their witness and grateful for their graciousness in hosting us here today. Rich wanted me to tell you, restrooms over there, water over there, water in the back, all kinds of fun things. Excellent. Fantastic. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, don't be a stranger. If you need to find anything, please find one of us and we'll be able to help you out. So this is such a beautiful venue, and such a beautiful venue to speak about the beautiful vocation of homeschooling and Catholic homeschooling that we're all here to hear Laura Berquist's words, to hear some other words from our employees. I myself am a homeschooling graduate myself, class of 2009 for Mother Divine Grace School. As a Director of Advancement, I've been with the school for the last 10 years. This is my 11th school year in administration. I handle everything from financial aid to communications to fundraising. And it's been beautiful to take a peek behind the curtain of what I saw as a student and be able to see the depth and the beauty that is built up into our program and the true joy that homeschooling is. I've just started this journey myself with my own students. I've got 4 children. The oldest is 6, the youngest is 3 months old. I'm looking forward to seeing them tomorrow. The oldest is in 1st grade, and our 4-year-old is just starting preschool. So it's just starting that journey for myself. It is really important that you guys are here today. You're embracing something that is difficult, but something that is very important, as we're going to hear Laura say. But I want to start us off with some words from John Paul II in his letter to families on the section on the civilization of love. He says, "Parents are the first and most important educators of their own children, and they also possess a fundamental competence in this area. They are educators because they are parents." So that is just hard stop. The reason that you are all here, you do not need special competency other than the graces that you are being given in marriage to do this for your own children. God is going to give you the graces, and you might need some help from your local community. You might need some help from moms and consultants and other teachers along the way, but because you are parents, you are educators. This year we've been doing many of these all throughout the country, going everywhere from Ireland to our backyard in Santa Paula, California, all the way out here to Idaho, to Virginia, and we've just been struck by how many people are seeing the light and the joy that comes from Catholic homeschooling. And so we are so grateful to see an excellent turnout tonight and to be speaking with you here about MODG and Catholic homeschooling in general. So first, I'd like to introduce Laura Berquist, who is the founder of Mother Divine Grace School. She started our school back in 1995. We are at our 29th school year right now. And she was actually the Thrashers consultant for, I believe, almost all of those years. And she is honestly one of the wisest women I know. Probably don't tell my mom that. And what is, I know, highest on her list of accomplishment is the homeschooling mother of her own children. And she is here to speak with us first about classical education. Laura, take it away.
Now?
Yeah. Can I take it out?
You can take it out.
Yeah. That'll work better. Okay. So thank you so much for coming, and I am so pleased to talk to you. I want to talk first about classical education, what it is, what it's ordered to, and why it is important, and what it looks like in kindergarten through 12th grade. do want to say that I really think classical education is important, and I'm going to explain why. But I think homeschooling is even more important. So the second talk I am going to give is about homeschooling. And I want you to know that. That is, here, I want to talk first about classical education. The order in education is important. We want our children to be educated. I think what Chris said is really true. We can do this because we are parents. I remember when I first started going to homeschooling conferences, Dr. William Mara was at a lot of the same conferences I was at. And his message was, take your kids out of school, and if you play cards with them, they will be better off. It was kind of funny. And you know, I'm not really an advocate of just playing cards, right? But I think there's a truth in that I do want to speak to in my second talk. So I'm going to start with classical education. And just a little bit about my background. Some of you already know this, but for those of you who don't, I'm a graduate of Thomas Aquinas College, a Catholic classical liberal arts school in Southern California. Some of you are very familiar with it. I was in the first graduating class, and my husband was one of the founders of the college. The curriculum at TAC was and is fully classical. We went through the Platonic dialogues, we read the logic books of Aristotle, the physics, the de anima, the ethics, the politics, and the metaphysics. The curriculum at TAC is illuminated by the church, so we read all of Scripture freshman year, many works of St. Augustine sophomore year, including the City of God and the Confessions, along with some of St. Anselm and St. Athanasius. In junior year, we began reading the Summa of St. Thomas, with concentrations on the beginning of the Summa, the moral life of man, and the treatise on law. In senior year, we read St. Thomas on the hypostatic union and the incarnation, hardest things I ever did in my life. Now, that's not everything we read, but it gives you an idea of the formation. We read the Enlightenment philosophers as well, and the great works of mathematics and natural science. But the formation came from the scriptures and the church. When I graduated from this course of studies, I knew I wanted my children, when I had them, to have the opportunity to study the same courses. I married, and as my family grew, my mom encouraged me to homeschool my children. And my husband and I eventually, it took a little while, but eventually decided to do that. I had read Dorothy Sayers' The Lost Tools of Learning, and I realized that there was both a what and a how to classical education. So after 10 years of trying various materials out on my children, and having explored the different methods one might employ, I came up with a classical curriculum for children intended to prepare them for the fullness of classical education when the time came, but also to equip them for life, whatever path they might choose. And that's when I wrote Designing Your Own Classical Curriculum, and shortly thereafter founded Mother of Divine Grace School. As Chris said, we've been operating for 29 years, and we currently serve about 6,300 students. And I do want to say that I never intended to write a book or start a school. I never had a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. But I try to be open to the Lord's direction, and it appeared to me that that's what he wanted. And I sure hope that's true. So, let's talk about what classical education is and what it's ordered to. There are different views. There are those who think classical education is the reading of ancient texts that were very important in the development of Western civilization, and that it's ordered to shoring up Western civilization. There are those who think that classical education is doing the liberal arts of the trivium and the quadrivium fully, and then studying the philosophic sciences. They think it's ordered to helping children think well about any subject they encounter. There are those that think classical education is a particular formation of mind and heart that is appropriate to a man as a man. I think there's truth in all of these positions, and I like to synthesize them. The information the content of those ancient books of the first view, and the formation of mind and heart received from the classical texts, the focus of the third view, have informed both Western civilization and the Church's thought throughout the ages, just as the second view contends. All three views are correct. So let's talk about the synthesized view that incorporates the truths of all three. Information and formation are closely related, though they differ in an important way. Intellectual formation is primarily about developing the habits of thought that make it possible to use information rightly. An intellectually well-formed man is able to think about any subject he chooses, for he can acquire the information necessary when he desires it, and his habits of thought will make it possible for him to follow an argument as well as make reasonable deductions and right judgments about it. So if we do this, our children will be equipped for life. Whether or not they learn and retain everything that is presented in school, and you know they don't, neither did I, right? They will be able to learn any subject when it becomes necessary or desirable because they will know how to learn. Until they know how to do this, most, though not all, of the subjects studied are less essential than that formation itself. The fact is that though all men think, thinking can be done well or badly, and one can be taught to do it well. So one large goal of education is to teach children how to think. In general, to develop the right way of thinking. But we also want them to accumulate facts or information. Facts are necessary in education. Some, like the truths of the faith, are essential. However, even with respect to those truths that need to be known, knowing alone is just not enough. My husband, Mark Berquist, always said, one also needs to acquire a method whereby deeper penetration of the truth becomes possible. Classical education, in any definition, includes grammar, rhetoric, and logic. So it is clearly by intention ordered to teaching people the art of learning. It's important to highlight the order in the disciplines in the classical program, as the second view I gave does. The arts of the trivium and the quadrivium prepare the student's mind to study the philosophic sciences, the physics, de anima, ethics, and politics. And all of those are ordered to metaphysics, or natural theology, and all of that is ordered to sacred theology. Aristotle, of course, did not know the sacred theology was even possible, but he did know that to know the first cause was the only thing that would satisfy the mind. That schema for education, starting in the liberal arts and realizing its end in sacred theology, is laid out by St. Thomas in his commentary on Boethius's De Trinitate. So we see that classical education is ordered in itself to understanding, insofar as we can in this life, God, who is the noblest and most perfect object of our intellect and will. And that leads to a further reflection. We are made in God's image and likeness, as St. Thomas says, because we have the power to know and to love, as God does. Now, we're more perfectly in his image and likeness when we're actually using those powers and not just having them. And when we are using them to know and love him, we are using them most perfectly. We become more perfect and thus more like God insofar as we know and love him. And that's the goal of our life. It's the goal of our life as men, and especially as disciples of Christ. And it's also the goal of classical education as understood by St. Thomas. So you can see that classical education is Catholic education. Now, I've heard it said that classical education cannot be Christian or Catholic, that classical education cannot be Christian or Catholic. And that would, as I've already indicated, be a real surprise to St. Thomas, who understands education in precisely those terms in the commentary I was talking about. When he's talking about it there, it's sometimes referred to as the division and method of the sciences. He takes for granted that education involves the 7 liberal arts, that they're for the sake of the philosophic sciences, which have an order among themselves, and that the whole of this education is intended to bring one to an understanding of theology. He sees that as the right way to perfect the intellect. And for many years, schools in the West followed this understanding of education. There was a time when classical education was the education every educated person in Western civilization received. They've abandoned that understanding in recent years, either because they have abandoned the faith itself, or because they are moved to a practical view of education, where education is seen as a job ticket, not as an opportunity to develop the soul. In the past, for example, when my father was a student, even those who had business majors, as he did, followed the order of liberal education. My father had many of the same courses, even some of the same texts in his undergraduate education as I did at Thomas Aquinas College. The idea was to give the students the formation that built Western civilization, to make them free men, which is why we call it liberal, right? From liberare to free. Men formed in this way are free. They're able to determine their course of action in the light of right reason. One can see the effects around one of relinquishing this idea of education. One further thing, many people assume that classical education is about pagan people, ideas, and cultures. And this is simply false. Classical education is about truth. It is outside of time, and it doesn't consider culture. It's about the perfection of the intellect, both by developing the power of the soul and by studying the right subjects in the right order. It leads to charity, that is love of God. You can't, in the Baltimore Catechism, right? What is our purpose in life? To know, love, and serve God. You have to know him before you can love him. And that leads you to serve him. So knowledge of God leads to charity, love of him. Now, as a matter of fact, some of the people who thought best about these subjects were alive in ancient Greece, notably Aristotle. But it's not as pagan ideas or thoughts thought by ancient Greeks that we consider what they said. It's as thinkers and those who pursue the truth. St. Thomas refers to Aristotle as the philosopher, just as he refers to St. Paul as the apostle throughout the Summa. He doesn't do this because he's considering Aristotle as an interesting Greek product of the time in which he lived. He refers to Aristotle with such deference because of Aristotle's great knowledge and power of reasoning, the value of which transcends the peculiarities of any particular culture. Aristotle reasoned to the existence of God, the unmoved mover. Aristotle came to know that God was a substantial unity, body and soul, and that his soul was everlasting. He saw that the separation of body and soul was against nature, and he saw that somehow something had gone wrong with the order of nature. Even though he lacked the benefit of revelation, he had some sense of the fall, because he observes in the metaphysics, in many ways, human nature is in bondage. It's amazing that what he got to without revelation. Aristotle was a remarkable thinker, and it's as such that his works are studied in a liberal education. So why is this education so important? Well, first of all, as I just said, it's an education that is ordered to knowing God as well as possible in this life. And that's the goal of our lives as men and as Christians. We want to be happy, and we want our children to be happy. And that means that we need to form our children so that they desire and act, with God of course, in such a way as to eventually come to Him in heaven. To do that, they need to know Him and His truth. Pope Pius XI once said, in Casti Connubii, that our children are the talents God has given to us to be returned to Him with interest. That has always stayed with me. Here's a way to think the effect this has on our day-to-day lives. I recently heard a speaker who reminded us that this world is not our home. He said, there are no permanent residents here. In effect, we all have a green card. We are all here for a time to do a specific work. No one is here permanently. There are no permanent residents. Further, he said, remember that this world is passing away. Today is here now, but it will be gone and never come back. Yesterday will never be repeated. It is the nature of this world to be impermanent. So no one should be focused on living today for the sake of today. This world is not our home. It is not permanent. It will not last. But eternity will. Heaven is our home. To be with God is our home. It's for this goal that we work here and now. So we're called to use our gifts and talents in God's service so that we can be with Him in this world, but especially in the next. When we give our children a classical education, we give them many tools for this mission. They are trained as leaders. They have been given good moral formation, and they have the faith. So they are equipped for two things: leadership and faithful witness. They can show the world what a good formation is and what a well-formed person does. They have been trained as leaders because they have been trained to think for themselves. They have been taught what an argument is and how to recognize and how to construct an argument. They have been educated as individuals in a human environment, not in an echo chamber of the latest cultural fad. They have been loved by you, their parents, who have been willing to do whatever was needed to give this formation to their children. As a result, they are not followers of the world, but leaders to eternity. Those who can see and live by principle, and who can therefore leave the crowd when the crowd is going the wrong direction. Only those who can leave the crowd can direct it rightly. Only those who are followers of Christ can be true leaders of men. To that end, classically educated Christian students, particularly Catholic students, because they have the fullness of the truth, have also been given good moral formation, in addition to their intellectual formation. They are taught the truth, and they see it lived in their teachers and in their parents. None of us is perfect, but we are fortunate to be part of a community, the classical community illuminated by faith, that is actually trying to live by the truth. So classically educated children have been given much. That doesn't mean their lives will be easy. It does mean, however, that it will be possible for them to live as they ought. So you look around. Our culture is falling apart. No one knows what nature is. Even well-intentioned people can't tell the difference between reality and will. I am what I identify as is crazy. We want to be rooted in reality. We have an opportunity, and I think because of that, an obligation to form our children in the truth. Maybe we can save our civilization. Maybe we can't. But we have an obligation to try. And we can give our children the tools they need to work in this mission and to come to Jesus in the end. I just cry really easily. very annoying. We have to remember that much will be expected of those to whom much is given. We cannot live for ourselves, and we cannot focus on this world. We must set our eyes on God and His people and His call. Now, what does this classical formation look like in K-12 education? We're not going to read the Summa with our little children or the physics of Aristotle. So how do we carry out classical education with our children? All learning is cyclical. We learn first on an introductory level, and then we come back to the same objects at a deeper level. I think that's easiest to see in mathematics. You first master counting. And then the very next step is to learn the 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, with respect to whole numbers. The rest of one's mathematical career is spent learning the power of those operations. One adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides fractions, then decimals and percents, then algebraic expressions, then trigonometric functions, and then you use them in calculus. This process is clearly a deepening of one's understanding of what was first learned on a very simple level. We follow the same process in every field, including the liberal arts and sciences. What young children do, if those who direct them are knowledgeable of the ends of education, are exercises that prepare their minds and hearts for the deepest level of natural and finally supernatural knowledge. So in the earliest years, one helps the student strengthen and make docile his imagination by exercises in observation, memorization, and sequencing. That's important, and I'm going to come back to it. One does this with a matter that also prepares the mind and heart for those later deep truths. At this level, children make their acquaintance with salvation history, something they will study for the rest of their lives. What a privilege to be able to help them start on that path. They also are introduced to the good and the beautiful in many areas as a preparation for the true later on. They learn the basis of all arithmetic. They develop an acquaintance with geometric figures. They're exposed to great music, and they study God's effects in nature, including in the heavens. Those are the beginnings of the arts of the quadrivium. They learn the basis of all language arts, reading and writing, which constitutes the beginning of the trivium. As the student matures, he continues to perfect these methods and subjects. He keeps coming back to them at a deeper level, developing his habits of thought. For example, in language arts preparation, one is clearly preparing for the trivium done in its fullness. The trivium, as we've noted before, consists of the arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It's worth noting that all of these have to do with speech in one way or another. Grammar is concerned with the construction of a sentence, and its principles are the way of signifying that determine the parts of speech. Logic concerns the common method of procedure in all the sciences, and principally considers definition and reasoning, both of which are carried on through speech. Rhetoric is the art of speaking persuasively, so it obviously has to do with speech. In all of these, there's a sort of making. You make a statement, you make an argument, you make a speech. Throughout grammar school and high school, we work on perfecting these first connections with the arts that will lead to the sciences, that will lead to natural and sacred theology. Further, our students work on argumentation so that they can eventually use rhetoric in the service of the truly noble. We teach our students to summarize, which is to order items according to importance instead of chronology. We teach them to identify an argument and then construct their own arguments. We teach them to develop their thoughts in paragraphs so that they can develop them later in essays and papers using the rhetorical modes: exposition, argumentation, description, and narration. All of that is the focus of 6th through 9th grade. With our older children, we introduce the ends of rhetoric into their regular assignments. Nearly all of the high school papers and essays in Mother of Divine Grace are formed around the ends of rhetoric. The political, whether something is expedient or not, my kids would say whether it was smart or stupid. The forensic, whether something is just or not. And the ceremonial, whether somebody is praiseworthy or blameworthy. In my experience, which now extends through quite a lot of time, these ends of rhetoric are by nature of interest to the high school student. Anytime I have a mom who tells me she can't get her high school kid to talk, I say, you just need to form the questions around these ends of rhetoric. They care passionately about whether something is just or unjust. And they care about whether somebody is praiseworthy or blameworthy. And they are actually really concerned about whether that was a smart or a stupid move, you know? So high school children care about those ends. And so with the high school student, that's what we're ordering ourselves to in the assignments. And that's a very real preparation for and participation in the art of rhetoric. And then we prepare for the philosophic sciences by having our students read and write about great literature and history. And through these works, the student gains vicarious experience, his imagination and his affections are moved rightly. He's presented with profoundly important views of human life and reality as a whole. He becomes aware of the greatest issues mankind faces. That's why you have your kids read the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, Confessions, right? Because that's what they're doing. He becomes aware of the greatest issues we face. And that prepares him well to read the more difficult things, the dialogues of Plato and the ethics and politics of Aristotle at the right time. We have our children study natural science, particularly animal behavior, as the beginning to the study of the soul. And as regards the highest object of the classical curriculum, God himself, the end of natural and supernatural theology, we're preparing our children for that from the moment they are born. And we do that by parenting our children in the light of God's fatherhood and of sacrificial love, which you all demonstrate every day. And by the doctrine, we teach them as soon as they are able to reason. As I said earlier, there is both a what and a how to classical education for the young. The what has to do with the cyclic approach to the subjects of the classical curriculum. We introduce all the arts and sciences, but do so foundationally and cyclically. There is, however, a how that should be considered. And it's for this reason that I would like to very briefly go over with you the central argument about how men learn from the De Anima of Aristotle. And this is, of course, a summary and in no way does full service to the argument. But I think it's important for us as classical educators to know what it is. And I do realize that this is familiar to a number of you, but I think it's good to revisit. So first, you receive the form of the external object by means of your five senses, right? You see it, touch it, hear it, taste it, smell it. That information is received in the proper sense to which that, which the particular form is directed. I mean, like the eyes see color and the tongue tastes, right? And the ears hear. When the form is received in the proper sense, then it is passed on to what Aristotle calls the common sense, the place where the integration of those proper forms comes. So, your eyes see the color, right? I remember in the De Anima, Aristotle's argument is your eyes see that the thing on the table is white, and your tongue can tell that the thing on the table is sweet. But your eyes don't know that it's sweet, and your tongue doesn't know that it's white. And yet you know that it's the same thing that is both white and sweet. So there's a place in you where the form that you've received through the proper senses is integrated, right? And he calls that the common sense. When kids have trouble with sensory integration, sensory integration's dysfunction is a problem in how how those forms received into the proper senses are integrated. And things like fast forward, which works with sensory integration dysfunction, is about helping them integrate that information from the proper senses. Then that integrated form in the common sense is passed on via nerves, I suppose, but Aristotle didn't talk about that, right? He just knew that this had to happen. That information is passed on to the, what he calls the imagination, we call the brain, generally speaking. But the imagination is what? That power of receiving images, right? So the forms which come from the senses, from the common sense, are like seals being pressed into wax, the wax of the imagination. Sometimes that wax is quite hard, and the seal has to be pressed over and over again in order to make the image. Like you've tried the multiplication tables over and over again. They don't seem to be getting in there. Sometimes the wax of the imagination is soft, and the seal makes an impression the first time, but the wax sort of mushes, not Aristotle's word, mine, and the image is gone. Sometimes the wax is just the right consistency, and then the image received is clear, sharp around the edges, so to speak, a faithful image of the original. Now, that image received into the imagination is sorted by what Aristotle calls the vis cogitativa. It's sorted into like kinds. So, you know, you see different kinds of trees, for example, and so you have trees and you have the sugar on the table and you have chairs, right? That all of those are received into the imagination. They get sorted into like kinds within the imagination, so that you have all the trees together and all the chairs together. How do we know that? Well, there are two, in terms of Aristotle, we know that because it's the only way to get to the next step. He saw that that had to happen because though, you know, that's a particular chair, and that's a particular chair, and they're very different, I know that they have the same nature. It's an artificial nature, but still. There is the thing about them called chairness that is common. Similarly with the trees or anything else you know. You have these images received into the imagination, but you have a power, an immaterial power called the agent intellect, which shines its light on that collection of like images, and Aristotle says it two different ways. Either draws out of that collection what is common, so abstracts, right? Or it illuminates, that's another way he puts it, it illuminates those images such that what's common in them is seen by the intellect. That's how we learn. That's when we know the natures of things, through that process that starts in the proper senses, goes to the common sense, the image in the imagination, which is sorted into like kinds. The agent intellect acts, what's called the agent intellect, acts on that collection of images, and then the knowledge of the nature of the thing is received into the possible intellect. So, I was thinking about this because I was talking to somebody about a psychology text. Father Ripperger, you know him, right? He has a text called Introduction to the Science of Mental Health, which is really a discussion of the De Anima. And he goes through this argument. I don't know that it's easier than reading the De Anima itself, to be honest, but it is there. So it's worth knowing. So I want you to notice something about this. The process that I described all is corporeal until you get to the agent intellect. Everything that's done happens in the body. The proper senses are in the body, the common senses in the body, the imagination is in the body. The agent intellect is the part of the soul, the agent and possible intellects are the part of the soul that are not corporeal, they're immaterial. But those corporeal parts can be improved. There's not a lot you can do about the proper senses if they're not receiving the images well. You can get glasses, right, or a hearing aid. There's not a lot you can do. And the common sense, like I said, if you've got a problem in the common sense, then there are some programs you work on integration. But the imagination, which is so crucial in this process of learning, there's a lot you can do about that. You can strengthen and make docile the imagination so that it serves the intellect, so that it receives the images well. As I said, you're talking about a bodily instrument. It's like muscles. You can make it stronger. And so in Mother Divine Grace, anybody who's done it, kindergarten through 5th grade, you know that every assignment revolves around observing, sequencing, and memorizing. And that's because what you're doing is strengthening and making docile the imagination. So you're preparing the brain to be the most effective instrument it can be. And I think that that's part of the understanding of classical education. That's what you're doing. And then you continue to use the imagination, strengthen it, and make it docile as you're developing first that ability to recognize an argument and then to construct an argument. And then, you know, when you're working in the rhetorical stage around those ends of rhetoric, you are again utilizing the imagination. If you can't remember the argument, you can't persuade anybody about it, right? So having that trained, docile, strong imagination is really significant. And that's why I like to talk about it with homeschooling moms, so that they can think about what they're doing. So it's not just what, it's also how. You know, you want your little kids to be memorizing. You want them to be observing, like trained observation. Little children are really good at that. But you can improve it, right? You can make it better. I always think about that place in Sherlock Holmes where Watson says, I don't get it. Like, we're seeing the same stuff. You know, we're presented with the same thing. How is it you're coming up with these answers? And I haven't got a clue. And Holmes says, how many times have you walked up the stairs to our flat? And Watson, being Watson, figures it out. I don't know, 200, 2,000, I don't know, long time, right? But up and down every day, out in the morning, back for lunch, out for dinner. So he figures out how much. And Holmes says to him, and how many steps are there? And Watson has no idea, though he has gone up and down those steps thousands of times. Well, so he looked, but he didn't see. And we want to train our children so that when they look, they see. And similarly, when they hear, they retain them, right? So, so we work on this training of the imagination in every level of our students' formation. And we work with the natural, because I mean, this is God's plan, right? It's like classical education is Catholic education. Classical education is natural education. We're just working with the natural inclinations of the student, because that's the natural order in learning. In the primary grammatical stage, kindergarten through 5th grade, we work on the foundational training with the memorization, observation, and sequencing. In the analytic stage, 6th through 9th, which, you know, anybody who has a 6th through 9th grader knows that they like to argue, right? So we work on helping them argue well, right? They summarize, analyze, recognize argument, and learn to construct a real argument. And in the rhetorical stage, 10th through 12th, we're working on articulating those arguments eloquently, presenting polished positions coherently and accurately. Each of these activities, as I said, strengthens and makes docile the imagination so that it can better serve the intellect. And notice, none of those have to do with content, but they're used with the content. And there's an appropriate content for each level, as I was saying earlier. So, here. So, I think that that's what I wanted to say to you primarily about classical education. Classical education is a great good. It is the education of a man as a man. It's the education that's natural to us. And we used to know that as a culture, and we don't But we, who are homeschooling, have the opportunity to give this to our children. The family that classically educates will be in many ways a sign of contradiction. Because of your formation, you will be different, and people are often offended by difference. But if you're not different, you can't make a difference. Only those who are inspired by truth and motivated by principles can lead. As I said, only those who are willing to leave the crowd can direct the crowd. Someone who is immersed in the things of this world, who does exactly what those around him do, cannot be a leader. So to educate your family classically is not easy, especially in this culture. But you are here and interested in this arduous but great good. What I see is that you have been called yourselves to leadership and faithful witness. You have been called to be a leaven in society, to help those around you come to the common good of truth and of the faith. You are Christ's disciples, his hands and his feet, carrying out his work in the world. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Laura. So at this point, we'll take a brief break. We've got some snacks in the back, some water. We also have a table back there with a sample of some of our art books. If you want to look at, I believe we have pre-K through 6th grade there. It shows a lot of what Laura was talking about at the lower level grades, how you observe, you sequence, you retell. So you can take a look at those. We also have some copies of the Introduction to Classical Education that are free for you to take home, and some stickers and holy cards back there as well. So take a break. We'll go about 5-10 minutes, and then we'll come back for the second half of our program. Thank you.